In a small, dusty town tucked between rolling hills and endless plains, life revolved around one thing: water. The people of Willow Creek had always depended on the narrow stream that snaked through their land, bringing life to crops, gardens, and even dreams. But this year was different. The sun hung heavy in the sky for weeks without mercy, turning the soil into cracked puzzle pieces and leaving everyone desperate. And when desperation sets in, even the smallest disagreements can spiral out of control. At the heart of it all were two neighbors who couldn't have been more different. One was a farmer, a no-nonsense woman with calloused hands and a stubborn streak as wide as her cornfields. She worked from sunrise to sunset, coaxing every last drop of life from the parched earth. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was her role. To most folks, she was simply the farmer. Everyone knew her fields fed families far beyond Willow Creek, but lately they'd started to look like graveyards. Brown stalks drooped under the weight of heat, and the once green rows now resembled something dead and brittle. Her neighbor, however, lived by an entirely different rhythm. This woman spent her days painting landscapes inspired by the very same creek that kept the farmer alive. She called herself an artist, though some whispered she was just eccentric. Her garden overflowed with wildflowers, herbs, and vegetables. Things that didn't seem practical to anyone else but brought her joy. Let's call her the painter because that's how the townsfolk referred to her behind closed doors. While the farmer worried about survival, the painter seemed lost in beauty, oblivious to the growing tension around her. It all began subtly enough. At first, the farmer noticed only minor changes: a little less water flowing into her irrigation system, a faint dryness at the edges of her field. She shrugged it off, assuming nature was simply being cruel again. But then the signs became impossible to ignore. Her pump sputtered and wheezed, struggling to draw water from the stream. When she walked upstream to investigate, she found the source of the problem: the painter's property. There, near the edge of the creek, stood buckets, pipes, and makeshift channels diverting water toward the painter's garden. It wasn't much, not at first glance, but over time those small diversions added up. The painter had been taking more than her share, leaving the farmer's crops gasping for moisture. Anger bubbled inside her as she stomped across the boundary line separating their properties. "What do you think you're doing?" the farmer demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The painter looked up from where she knelt, tending to a patch of lavender. "Oh, hello," she said casually, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'm just watering my plants. You know how dry it's been." "You're stealing my water," the farmer shot back, pointing at the tangled web of hoses leading away from the creek. "That's not yours to take." The painter stood slowly, meeting the farmer's glare with calm defiance. "Stealing? That's dramatic. The creek flows through both our lands. Who decides which part belongs to whom?" "It doesn't work like that," the farmer snapped. "If you keep this up, my crops will die. Do you understand what that means? People won't eat." The painter tilted her head, unfazed. "Maybe if you cared less about profit and more about preserving what we have, we wouldn't be in this mess." Their argument escalated quickly, voices rising until they echoed across the barren fields. Neighbors peeked out of windows or paused mid-chore to listen. By the time the shouting stopped, the damage was done. What had started as a quiet dispute over water had become something bigger, uglier. Word spread fast in a place like Willow Creek, and soon, everyone had an opinion. Some sided with the farmer, praising her hard work and accusing the painter of selfishness. Others defended the painter, saying the farmer cared too much about money and not enough about the community. As tensions simmered, the drought worsened. The creek grew thinner each day, its flow reduced to a trickle. The painter continued drawing water for her garden, while the farmer watched her crops wither. Neither woman budged, neither backed down. They were locked in a standoff, each convinced she was right. Little did they know, their feud would soon affect more than just themselves. In a town where water meant everything, their battle over the creek would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their own. For now, though, the conflict remained personal, a bitter war waged between two women who refused to see eye to eye. And so, The stage was set for something much larger. The drought had divided them, but it would take more than anger to tear apart the fragile bonds holding Willow Creek together. Yet as the days passed, it became clear that neither woman was willing to give in. Not yet. The farmer didn't sleep that night. She sat on her porch staring at the dark outline of her fields under the pale glow of the moon. The air was still and heavy, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. Her mind raced with thoughts of dying crops, empty wells, and the smug look on the painter's face during their argument earlier. It wasn't fair. All her hard work, her sweat, her sacrifices, was being undone because someone else decided they deserved more. She tried to think of solutions. Could she block the painter's pipes? Maybe tear them out altogether? But even as the idea crossed her mind, she knew it wouldn't solve the bigger problem. The painter would just find another way to take what she wanted. No, this required something smarter, something permanent, something that would make it clear who controlled the water. That's when it hit her, a plan so bold it made her heart race. If the painter thought she could steal from the creek without consequences, then the farmer would show her what real control looked like. She wouldn't just stop the painter, she'd take the entire creek for herself. Not forever, of course. Just long enough to teach her a lesson, and save her crops in the process. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the farmer hopped into her old pickup truck and drove down the winding dirt road to visit Old Man Harris. He lived alone on the outskirts of town, surrounded by rusted tools, half-finished projects, and stacks of yellowed blueprints. Harris was a legend in Willow Creek, known for his uncanny ability to fix anything with scraps he found lying around. Some said he could build a rocket ship out of chicken wire if you gave him enough time. When the farmer knocked on his door, Harris opened it slowly, squinting against the morning light. "What brings you here?" he asked gruffly, wiping grease-stained hands on his overalls. "I need your help," the farmer said, stepping inside. The smell of oil and sawdust filled the air as she explained her idea. Building a dam upstream to cut off the painter's access to the creek entirely. At first, Harris listened silently, scratching his stubbled chin. Then, as the details unfolded, a flicker of interest lit up his weathered face. "You're talking about rerouting the whole thing?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not rerouting," the farmer corrected. "Just stopping it for now. I need to protect my land." Harris studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." Over cups of bitter coffee brewed on a stove older than either of them, they sketched out a plan. The dam wouldn't be fancy, just sturdy enough to hold back the water until the farmer got her point across. They'd use logs, rocks, and whatever scrap metal they could scavenge from abandoned barns and junkyards. It wouldn't take long, if they worked quickly and quietly. Word traveled fast in Willow Creek, but the farmer wasn't worried. Most people were too busy trying to survive the drought to pay attention to rumors. Besides, she figured the townsfolk would understand once they saw how desperate things had become. After all, everyone had stakes in this fight. Farmers relied on the creek to grow food, families needed it to drink, and businesses depended on it to stay afloat. If the painter kept hoarding water, none of them would make it through the summer. By mid-afternoon, the farmer and Harris had gathered a small crew of trusted neighbors willing to lend a hand. There was Big Tom, a burly man with arms like tree trunks who owned the hardware store. Quiet Mary, a soft-spoken widow who always seemed to know exactly what people needed before they asked. And young Pete, a teenager eager to prove himself despite his gangly frame. Together, they loaded up trucks with supplies and headed toward the bend where the creek narrowed. The work began as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. Under the cover of darkness, the group moved quickly, their movements illuminated only by flashlights and the faint glow of the moon. Logs were dragged into place, rocks stacked carefully, and metal braces hammered into submission. Sweat poured down their faces as they labored through the night, driven by determination and the promise of relief. As the hours ticked by, the structure took shape, a rough but effective barrier that would redirect the creek's flow away from the painter's property. By dawn, it stood tall and solid, cutting off the water completely. The farmer stepped back to admire their handiwork, her chest swelling with pride. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. But while the farmer celebrated her victory, whispers of her plan spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Some cheered her boldness, calling her a hero for standing up to the painter. Others shook their heads, worrying about the fallout. What would happen when the painter discovered what had been done? Would she retaliate? And what about the rest of the town? How would they react if the creek dried up further downstream? Meanwhile, the painter remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing upstream. She spent the morning tending to her garden, humming softly as she watered her plants. She hadn't noticed the change yet. The water still trickled lazily into her buckets. But it wouldn't be long before the truth revealed itself. And when it did, the farmer knew there would be no turning back. The painter woke up the next morning to an eerie silence. Normally, the gentle gurgle of the creek was the first thing she heard as she stepped outside, its steady rhythm a comforting reminder that life still flowed, even in the harshest of times. But today there was nothing. Just the oppressive heat pressing down on her garden like a heavy blanket. At first she thought it might be her imagination. Maybe the drought had finally claimed the last drops of water from the creek. She walked over to the edge of her property where the channel she'd built snaked toward her plants. Her heart sank when she saw the truth. The stream was bone dry. Not even a trickle remained. Panic bubbled inside her as she traced the dried-up path upstream. Each step felt heavier than the last, her boots crunching against the cracked earth. The farther she went, the angrier she became. This wasn't just bad luck or nature's cruelty, it was deliberate. Someone had stolen her water, and she was determined to find out who. When she reached the bend in the creek, the evidence stared her straight in the face. There, blocking the flow entirely, stood a crude but effective dam. Logs, rocks, and scraps of metal formed a jagged wall that diverted the water away from her land. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at it in disbelief. Then, with a surge of fury, she scrambled up the bank to see where the redirected water was going. It didn't take long to figure it out. The new channel led directly to the farmer's fields. From her vantage point, she could see green shoots poking through the soil, proof that someone else's crops were thriving while hers withered. Her fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. Before she could think twice, she marched straight to the farmer's house. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, now baking the ground beneath her feet. By the time she arrived, sweat dripped down her neck and her chest heaved with exertion. She didn't bother knocking. She stormed right up to the porch where the farmer sat sipping iced tea like nothing was wrong. "What have you done?" the painter shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "You stole my water." The farmer looked up calmly, setting her glass aside. She didn't seem surprised to see the painter standing there, red-faced and fuming. In fact, she almost looked satisfied. "I didn't steal anything," the farmer replied coolly. "I took what's mine." "Yours?" the painter spat. "That creek doesn't belong to you, it belongs to everyone." The farmer stood slowly, meeting the painter's glare with one of her own. Funny coming from someone who's been hogging it for weeks. "Did you really think I'd let you keep taking without consequences?" "This isn't about me," the painter shot back. "What about the rest of us? What happens when the creek dries up completely because of your selfishness?" The farmer crossed her arms, unflinching. "If anyone around here is selfish, it's you. You care more about your stupid flowers than feeding actual people. My crops are what put food on tables, not your paintings." The painter staggered back, as if she'd been slapped. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away furiously. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You have no idea what this place means to me. That creek isn't just water, it's inspiration. It's life. And you're trying to destroy it." For a brief second, something flickered in the farmer's expression. Maybe guilt, maybe doubt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Well, maybe now you'll understand how it feels to lose everything," she said flatly. With that, the conversation ended. The painter turned and stormed off, leaving behind only the sound of her retreating footsteps. As she walked back to her property, anger burned hotter than ever. She refused to let the farmer win this battle. If the other woman wanted to play dirty, then fine. Two could play that game. Over the next few days, the painter devised a plan of her own. She couldn't undo the dam, not without help, but she could make sure the whole town knew what the farmer had done. After all, the farmer wasn't the only one who mattered in Willow Creek. Everyone relied on the creek, whether they admitted it or not. She started small, talking to neighbors during her daily walks. At first, she played innocent, acting like she was seeking advice. "Have you noticed the creek drying up lately?" she'd ask casually. "It's strange, isn't it? Almost like someone's tampering with it." Some shrugged it off, too busy dealing with their own struggles to care. Others nodded knowingly, sharing rumors they'd heard about the farmer's secret project. The painter listened intently, filing away every detail for later use. Slowly but surely, she began piecing together a narrative, one that painted the farmer as greedy and reckless. Her next move was bolder. She invited a handful of trusted townsfolk to her house for tea one afternoon, serving homemade lemonade sweetened with honey from her bees. As they sat in her garden, surrounded by wilting flowers and dusty herbs, she laid it all out. "The farmer has taken control of the creek," she announced dramatically, leaning forward so everyone could see the fire in her eyes. "She built a dam upstream, cutting off the water supply to the rest of us. Can you believe it? She thinks she can hoard nature itself." Gasps rippled through the group. Some looked skeptical. Others nodded gravely, muttering about how selfish the farmer had always been. The painter seized the moment, urging them to spread the word. "We can't let her get away with this," she said firmly. "If we don't stand up now, none of us will survive the summer." By evening, the story had spread like wildfire. People gathered in groups, whispering anxiously about the farmer's actions. Farmers worried about their livestock, mothers fretted about bathing their children, and shopkeepers wondered how long their wells would last. Even those who had initially supported the farmer began to question her motives. As tension simmered, the painter watched from the sidelines, satisfied with the chaos she'd stirred. She knew it wouldn't be enough to bring the farmer down completely, but it was a start. For now, she contented herself with the knowledge that the entire town was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. And deep down, she hoped the farmer would realize just how far-reaching her decision had been. Because in Willow Creek, where water meant life, no one could afford to play God, not even someone with the best intentions. The farmer didn't realize the storm she had unleashed, or maybe she did but chose to ignore it. She was too busy watching her fields come back to life. The dry, cracked soil softened under the steady flow of water from the rerouted creek. Cornstalks that had been drooping like defeated soldiers began to stand tall again, their green leaves unfurling toward the sun. For the first time in weeks, there was hope in her heart. But while her crops thrived, the rest of Willow Creek started to feel the pinch. Downstream, farmers noticed their irrigation systems sputtering and coughing before going completely silent. Fishermen who relied on the creek for their catch found themselves staring at empty pools where fish once swam. Even the town's children, who used to splash in the shallow waters after school, were left with nothing but dusty banks and cracked mud. It wasn't long before complaints trickled into the farmers' ears. At first they came indirectly, neighbors stopping by to borrow tools or drop off eggs, casually mentioning how dry things had gotten lately. Then came the more pointed comments. "Heard you've been doing some work upstream," one man said, his tone heavy with implication. "Hope it doesn't mess with the rest of us." The farmer brushed them off, telling herself it was just temporary. Once her fields recovered, she'd figure out a way to share the water fairly. But deep down, doubt crept in. Was she really helping anyone by hoarding the creek? Or was she making things worse? Meanwhile, the painter seized every opportunity to fan the flames of discontent. She organized informal gatherings in the evenings, inviting townsfolk to sit around a bonfire in her backyard. There, under the stars, she spun tales of greed and betrayal, painting the farmer as someone who cared only about profit and not about the community. "She thinks she can control nature itself," the painter declared one night, her voice rising above the crackle of the fire. "She built that dam without thinking about anyone else. What happens when our wells run dry? When our animals go thirsty? When we have nothing left? Her words struck a chord. Some nodded solemnly. Others whispered among themselves, sharing stories of their own struggles. A farmer spoke up, his face lined with worry. I lost 3 head of cattle last week because my trough dried up. If this keeps up, I'll lose everything. A mother chimed in next, clutching her toddler close. We barely have enough water to bathe the kids anymore. How are we supposed to keep them healthy? Each story added fuel to the growing anger. The painter listened intently, nodding along as if she understood their pain. And maybe she did, at least in part. Her garden was wilting too, after all. But there was something else driving her. Revenge. She wanted the farmer to feel the same. Desperation she had felt when she discovered her water gone. As the days passed, the divide in Willow Creek deepened. People began taking sides, forming factions based on loyalty rather than logic. Those who supported the farmer argued that her actions were necessary to save the town's food supply. Without her crops, they reasoned, everyone would starve. Others sided with the painter, insisting that survival meant nothing if it came at the cost of fairness and unity. Tensions boiled over during a heated meeting at the community hall. The room buzzed with nervous energy as residents packed inside, eager to voice their opinions. The farmer sat near the front, flanked by a few allies, while the painter stood at the back, arms crossed, surrounded by her supporters. Chairs scraped against the wooden floor as people shifted uncomfortably, waiting for someone to break the silence. Finally, a local baker stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't working," he said, his voice cracking. "We're tearing each other apart over water. Water. Something none of us owns. Something we're supposed to share." His words hung in the air, heavy and true. For a moment, it seemed like reason might prevail. Then the painter stepped up, her eyes blazing with conviction. "He's right," she said, pointing a finger directly at the farmer. "This is about greed. She thinks she's entitled to take whatever she wants, no matter who gets hurt. Is that the kind of town we want to live in?" The room erupted into chaos. Voices shouted over one another, accusations flying like arrows. The farmer stood abruptly, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. "You think I'm greedy?" she shot back, glaring at the painter. "I'm trying to survive, to feed my family, and yours. Would you rather we all starve so your flowers can bloom?" The argument raged on, unresolved, leaving everyone more divided than ever. As people filed out of the hall, tempers still simmering, it became clear that neither side was willing to compromise. The farmer returned to her fields, determined to hold her ground. The painter retreated to her garden, plotting her next move, and the rest of Willow Creek braced themselves for whatever came next. No one realized just how quickly disaster could strike. Days later, dark clouds rolled in, blotting out the relentless sun that had scorched the land for weeks. At first, the rain brought relief, a gentle drizzle that soaked into the parched earth. But soon the skies opened up, unleashing torrents of water that pounded the ground mercilessly. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the foundations of houses, while lightning lit up the horizon in jagged streaks. The farmer woke in the middle of the night to the sound of rushing water. She grabbed her flashlight and ran outside, her heart pounding, as she surveyed the scene. The makeshift dam she had built couldn't withstand the force of the storm. Logs broke loose, rocks tumbled downstream, and the entire structure collapsed under the weight of the floodwaters. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The redirected channel overflowed, spilling into nearby fields and washing away crops. The surge of water tore through fences, flooded basements, and swept away anything in its path. People scrambled to higher ground, shouting warnings to their neighbors as the creek transformed into a raging river. Amid the destruction, the farmer found herself face to face with the painter. Both women had sought refuge on a hill overlooking the devastation, their clothes soaked and their faces streaked with dirt. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stared at the wreckage below, the flooded fields, the shattered homes, the remnants of their feud carried away by the current. "We did this," the painter whispered finally, her voice trembling. All because we couldn't share. The farmer nodded slowly, guilt settling heavily in her chest. In their fight over the creek, they had forgotten what truly mattered: the land, the people, and the fragile balance that held everything together. Now, as they watched the water rage unchecked, they understood the cost of their pride. In that moment, the battle between them faded, replaced by a shared sense of loss. It wasn't just their properties that had been destroyed. It was the trust, the unity, the very essence of Willow Creek. And though the storm would eventually pass, rebuilding wouldn't be easy. Not for the town, and certainly not for the two women who had started it all. When the storm finally passed, Willow Creek looked like a battlefield. The once familiar landscape was unrecognizable, fields reduced to swamps, roads turned into rivers of mud, and homes battered by the relentless force of water. Debris littered every corner: broken furniture, twisted metal, shattered pieces of lives that had been washed away in a single night. The creek, which had always been the town's lifeline, now felt like an enemy, a wild, untamed thing that had lashed out in anger. The farmer stood ankle-deep in muck, staring at what remained of her fields. Her cornstalks were flattened, buried under layers of silt and water. It was as if all her hard work, the sleepless nights, the endless labor, had been erased in an instant. She clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears, but they came anyway, streaming down her face without permission. Nearby, the painter trudged through the wreckage of her garden. What had once been vibrant with color and life was now a soggy mess. Her prized lavender plants lay uprooted, their purple blooms scattered like forgotten dreams. Even her easel, where she'd spent countless hours painting the beauty of the creek, was gone, swept away by the floodwaters. She sank to her knees, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on her. For both women, the devastation was personal, but it was also bigger than either of them. As they surveyed the damage, they couldn't help but notice how the entire town suffered alongside them. Homes were flooded, wells contaminated, and livelihoods destroyed. People wandered aimlessly, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The bakery owner tried to salvage his ruined stock, tossing soggy loaves into a growing pile outside his shop. A fisherman sat on the bank of the swollen creek, staring blankly at the spot where he used to cast his net. Children huddled together, clutching stuffed animals rescued from the chaos, too stunned to cry. It didn't take long for word to spread about what had caused the disaster. Neighbors pieced together the story. The farmer's dam had collapsed under the pressure of the storm, unleashing a torrent of water that overwhelmed the town. Some blamed her outright, accusing her of selfishness and recklessness. Others pointed fingers at the painter, saying her greed had sparked the feud in the first place. Arguments flared again, tempers rising as people tried to assign blame. But amidst the finger-pointing and accusations, something unexpected happened. Slowly, quietly, people began to come together, not to argue but to help. Families opened their doors to neighbors who had lost everything. Strangers worked side by side, clearing debris and salvaging whatever they could. Someone set up a makeshift kitchen near the community hall, serving hot meals to anyone in need. Another organized a cleanup crew, handing out shovels and gloves to volunteers. The farmer and the painter found themselves drawn into this effort almost against their will. At first, they avoided each other, working separately in different parts of town. But the sheer scale of the destruction left no room for pride or resentment. When the painter saw the farmer struggling to haul a fallen tree off someone's driveway, she hesitated for only a moment before stepping in to lend a hand. And when the farmer noticed the painter trying to rescue a stranded cat from a flooded shed, she joined in without a second thought. As they worked together, small conversations began to break the ice. They started with practicalities. How best to clear a clogged drain, where to find clean drinking water, but gradually grew deeper. One afternoon, while stacking sandbags along the creek to prevent further flooding, the farmer spoke up. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to protect my crops." The painter paused, leaning on her shovel. "I know," she said after a moment. And I wasn't thinking about anyone else when I took more water than I needed. I don't know what I thought. They shared a glance then, brief but meaningful. For the first time, they saw each other not as enemies, but as human beings, flawed, tired, and carrying burdens heavier than either had let on. Over the next few days, their tentative truce grew stronger. Together, they helped draft a plan to rebuild not just their properties, but the entire town. Engineers were called in to assess the damage and design a sustainable system for managing the creek's flow. Channels would be widened, reservoirs built, and rules established to ensure fair distribution of water. Everyone had a role to play, whether it was digging trenches, planting new trees, or simply offering words of encouragement to those who felt overwhelmed. The painter threw herself into the project with renewed purpose. She painted murals on the walls of the community hall, depicting scenes of resilience and unity. One showed the creek winding peacefully through lush fields. Another captured the spirit of the townsfolk working together to overcome adversity. Her art became a symbol of hope, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments there was beauty to be found. The farmer, meanwhile, focused on reviving her fields. With the help of her neighbors, she planted new seeds and repaired irrigation systems. This time, though, she made sure to leave enough water for others downstream. It wasn't easy. There were still days when fear gnawed at her, urging her to hoard resources. But she pushed through, knowing that cooperation was the only way forward. As weeks turned into months, Willow Creek slowly began to heal. The scars of the flood remained visible, but so did the signs of progress. Fields sprouted green again, gardens bloomed, and laughter returned to the streets. The creek flowed freely once more, its waters shared equitably among all who depended on it. Through it all, the farmer and the painter stayed close, not as friends exactly, but as allies united by a shared experience. They attended town meetings together, advocating for policies that prioritized sustainability and fairness. They visited schools to teach children about the importance of conservation and teamwork. And sometimes, late in the evenings, they sat, together on the banks of the creek, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Neither woman forgot the lessons they had learned, or the price they had paid to learn them. The drought, the dam, the flood, all of it had taught them that nature wasn't something to be controlled or owned. It was a gift, fragile and precious, requiring care and respect. More importantly, they realized that survival wasn't a solo endeavor. In a place like Willow Creek, where water meant life, everyone rose or fell together. And so the story of their feud became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when greed and pride overshadowed compassion and collaboration. It also became a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of community. Because in the end, the people of Willow Creek proved that even the deepest divides could be bridged when hearts were willing to meet halfway. As the seasons changed, Willow Creek began to feel like itself again, or at least a version of itself that was wiser, stronger, and more united. The scars of the flood remained etched into the land and the memories of its people, but they were no longer wounds. Instead, they became reminders of mistakes made, lessons learned, and bonds forged in the hardest of times. The farmer stood on her porch one crisp autumn morning, sipping coffee as she watched sunlight spill over her fields. Rows of golden corn stretched out before her, swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't just her crops thriving, it was her spirit too. For months after the flood, guilt had gnawed at her. Guilt for building the dam, guilt for causing so much destruction. But now, standing amidst the fruits of collective effort, she felt something else. Pride, not the selfish kind she'd once known, but a quiet satisfaction that came from working alongside others toward something greater than herself. Downstream, the painter sat cross-legged by the creek, sketching its gentle curves in her notebook. Her garden had recovered beautifully, bursting with wildflowers and herbs that seemed to glow under the morning light. She dipped her brush into a jar of water taken directly from the stream, marveling at how clear it was. This water wasn't hers alone anymore, it belonged to everyone. That realization brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Their relationship, though still complicated, had evolved into something neither woman had expected. They weren't best friends. They probably never would be, but they shared a mutual respect born out of struggle. Whenever the farmer passed the painter's house, she waved politely. And whenever the painter visited the market, she always stopped to admire the fresh produce grown by the farmer's hands. These small gestures might have seemed insignificant to outsiders, but to them, they carried weight. The town itself had transformed in subtle, yet profound ways. People who had once avoided each other now greeted one another warmly on the streets. Neighbors helped neighbors without being asked, whether it was fixing a fence or sharing extra supplies during lean times. Even the community meetings, which used to dissolve into arguments, had become spaces for collaboration and innovation. Everyone understood now that their survival depended not on individual strength, but on collective resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, the entire town gathered near the creek for a ceremony marking the completion of the new water management system. Engineers had designed a series of controlled channels and reservoirs, ensuring fair distribution for all. A plaque was unveiled inscribed with words chosen by the townsfolk themselves: shared waters, shared lives. The farmer spoke first, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I won't pretend I didn't make mistakes," she said, looking out at the crowd. "I let fear and anger cloud my judgment, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. But we've come so far since then. We've shown that even when things fall apart, we can rebuild, not just our homes, but our trust in each other." When she finished, the painter stepped forward, clutching a rolled-up painting in her hands. She unfurled it slowly, revealing a vibrant depiction of the rebuilt creek surrounded by green fields, blooming gardens, and smiling faces. "This is what we've created together," she said softly. "It's a reminder that beauty doesn't exist in isolation. It grows from connection, from sharing what we have instead of hoarding it." Applause erupted, echoing through the valley as the townsfolk cheered. Children ran barefoot along the banks, laughing as they splashed in the shallow waters. Elderly couples sat side by side on blankets, reminiscing about how far they'd come. Someone started singing an old folk song, and soon everyone joined in, their voices rising in harmony. That night, as the stars emerged one by one, the farmer and the painter found themselves sitting together near the creek. Neither said much, they didn't need to. The sound of flowing water filled the silence, steady and soothing. It reminded them both of how fleeting life could be, how easily everything could slip away if not cherished. "I never thought I'd say this," the farmer said finally, breaking the quiet. "But I'm glad you fought me." The painter chuckled, shaking her head. "Me too. If I hadn't, none of this," she gestured around them, "would have happened." They sat there, for a while longer, watching the moonlight dance on the surface of the water. In that moment, they weren't adversaries or allies. They were simply two women bound by the same land, the same struggles, and the same hope for a better future. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. There would still be disagreements, droughts, and challenges ahead. But the people had proven something crucial. They were stronger together. The creek, once a source of division, had become a symbol of unity, a testament to the power of forgiveness, teamwork, and humility. And so, life went on. The farmer continued tending her fields, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The painter painted every sunrise and sunset, capturing moments of fleeting beauty to remind herself and everyone else that even after the darkest storms, light always returned. Years later, when newcomers arrived in Willow Creek, they were told the story of the farmer and the painter. Some called it a cautionary tale, others saw it as a beacon of hope. Either way, it served as a reminder that greed and pride could destroy even the most vital connections, but compassion and cooperation could mend them. In the end, the creek flowed freely, carrying not just water, but lessons far deeper than anyone had imagined. And as long as it did, the people of Willow Creek vowed to honor its gift, not just for themselves, but for generations to come.